Are you having a very challenging time trying to figure out your wedding budget, what you can afford, how much things cost? Luckily for you, I'm a little bit of an expert in this field, so go ahead and stick around for this video to learn more.
Beautiful night, we're looking for something dumb to do. Hey baby, I think I wanna marry you.
Hey everyone, it's your favorite wedding planner Bree here. Today I want to go ahead and talk about budgeting for your wedding. Obviously money is one of the biggest factors in a wedding. You have to be able to afford everything that you're going to pay for. You have to be able to cut down your guest list to be able to afford it. You have to pick a menu that you'll be able to afford, decorations you'll be able to afford, etc. So that's why you need to figure out your budget pretty much first thing, because you can't do much else till you figure out a budget. You can't go find a venue till you know if you can afford it. You can't go find vendors till you know if you can afford it. You can't go figure out which food you're gonna want till you know you can afford it. So budgeting is the first thing that you should do. Obviously weddings are, a little bit expensive these days, but there are steps you can take, and I'll kind of go over those as well, that will help cut some costs. But first I want to just go over averages. So in 2019 is the newest stat that I have. The average wedding cost about $29.5 thousand. That's a lot of money, but that's for everything except for the honeymoon. But still, that's a lot of money. I think that includes the ring too in that stat, but still, that's a lot. But let's get into the steps of budgeting. Let's get into the steps of figuring out your budget. So first things first, you want to figure out who's contributing to that special day. For instance, maybe your parents are going to contribute and help you pay for some things. You need to figure out exactly what they're going to pay for. Your spouse's parents, grandparents, whoever, aunt and uncle, might be paying for some things. So you all need to sit down, figure out, okay, what can everybody pay towards this wedding? And then you can start to make your budget. The second thing is to estimate a guest count. You want to know how many people that you can have based on the budget that you're coming up with. So say your ideal wedding is going to be 100 people. Then you need to know that so that you can come up with a budget for 100 people, because we want to spend this much per person on food. You need to know how many people you're paying per person for food for. So that's another big one. You also are going to want to choose your non-negotiables, things that you are not willing to give up no matter how much they cost. You and your spouse need to come up with this. This has nothing to do with family or parents or anything. Just figure out, okay, for some reason my boyfriend says he wants an ice sculpture at our wedding. Okay, well, apparently that's his non-negotiable. Mine would be something closer to like these certain types of flowers, but figure out your non-negotiables, because then that will be factored into your budget as well. Then you want to do your research to find out costs while you're doing your budget. So how much does a photographer generally cost? How much does a venue generally cost? How much does food generally cost? Obviously costs are going to vary depending on who you go with as your vendor, as your venue, as your caterer, etc. But kind of in order to kind of make a budget, you need to know how much these things are going to cost, kind of around the range that they're going to cost. Then you want to make sure you do the math. Make sure the numbers add up. Make sure that, everything's going to be fit. Make sure that you actually included everything in the budget that you came up with. It's kind of a touchy subject, money, dealing with other people and money, but unless you have money, you're not going to be able to plan a wedding. So it is a must-have conversation. It is a must-have step in your wedding planning, and one of the first steps that you are going to need to take as well. Let's get into some budget saving costs, because I know people are always trying to obviously save money anywhere they can. I would too. I do. So let's talk about the first one, which is going to be having your ceremony and reception in the same place. So a lot of times when you have your ceremony and your reception in the same place, the venue will give you a deal on one of them. And then another thing that it does is it also cuts down costs on transportation. So people are not having transferred to a different venue in between the ceremony and the reception. So that definitely will be helpful in cutting costs. Sometimes opting for a weekday, a Friday, or even sometimes Sundays can be cheaper. I know the venue I work at, Friday, the weekdays are cheaper, Fridays are cheaper, and Sundays are a tiny bit cheaper. Saturdays are in demand. So if you want a Saturday, which is obviously the most convenient for most people, but it's in demand. So it's going to be a little bit more expensive, if not a lot more expensive. Another one would be using Pinterest and DIYing some of your decorations. I'm not saying you have to DIY everything. You can if you want, but at least do some stuff. Some stuff is very easy to DIY, and it makes it so that you're not going out and buying all of those things, which will definitely save you money in the long run. It might take some time to get some of those things done, but that's why you have family, friends, everyone will be willing to help out, I promise. Something that you could do instead of hosting the bar is you could just host a signature cocktail. So that way you're not paying for the entire bar the entire night. You could just have one signature cocktail that you're paying for, which will cut down costs. I mean, yes, you'll have more people going for that signature cocktail, but also you have people who aren't going to want that. And so then you won't be having to pay for all these other people's alcohol. And with that, you can kind of control what you want to do as well. Another thing is, if you're allowed, some venues allow you to bring your own alcohol, which is going to be cheaper probably for you in the long run. Venues upcharge on the alcohol because they're charged, and then they have to make a profit on that as well. So if you can bring your own alcohol, obviously it's usually generally cheaper because you can go buy a bunch of it at Costco or wherever, and then you're not having to pay those extra fees on top. Some venues don't allow you to, so that's something you need to figure out when you're looking for a venue. Another thing would be so there's something called a faux cake. If you don't want to pay for a full 3-tiered cake because you can have a sheet cake in the kitchen that they're going to cut up, you can do what's called a faux cake. So the bottom 2 layers would basically be styrofoam that are decorated to look like a cake, and you would never know the difference. And then the top layer would be the actual cake that you would cut into for like the pictures. That's always an option. Obviously, it's cheaper to have styrofoam than it is to make 2 other huge layers of cake. So that's something you can talk to your bakery about. Consider a buffet meal. Considering buffet meals, they're usually cheaper in my experience. Obviously, it will depend on the caterer or the venue. But usually they're cheaper because you don't have to have as much staffing for a buffet meal. It will depend because, like I said, sometimes people charge because it's going to be more food. But in my experience, generally buffet is cheaper. And honestly, buffet is super nice because people can get as much or as little as they want. They can go back for seconds, thirds. I mean, when you're doing a plated meal, it's super nice. It's classy. It's elegant. But people are not getting as much food as they probably want. Another thing would be to buy a pre-owned wedding dress. Obviously, I know some people don't like this one, but if you're really looking to save money, wedding dresses can be very expensive. And definitely buying a pre-owned one that is just as beautiful and it's only been worn one time, why not? I mean, it's just a matter of doing your research and looking. Another one would be creating your wedding signage instead of like printing a bunch of pieces of paper, because printing costs are a lot. You could just make one big sign that says menu instead of printing 100 or 200 individual menus. That will save you some cost as well. You could make that out of like a piece of wood with some paint. And then a lot of times you'll have to do your research depending on what you're looking at, but buying can be cheaper than renting. So when you're looking at renting decorations or anything, maybe look and see if you can purchase it somewhere, because hey, it's going to be a lot cheaper, but also you'll be able to, after your wedding, sell it and maybe make some profit on it as well. If you cannot afford an extravagant bouquet, because flowers can be expensive as well, ask your florist and maybe she can do a couple of those big flowers and then some filler flowers, because filler flowers are a lot cheaper, but it'll still make the bouquet look full. Just a little tip. finding a venue with flexible vendors. So some venues will make you use their vendors. They have contracts with them, etc. Some venues you can bring your own vendors, which means that you can find the best price out there for a DJ or a photographer and bring that person. You can do your own research versus having to use the venues people who might be a little bit more expensive. And then another thing is, don't be afraid to call in help. If you are getting overwhelmed because you're trying to do all this DIY and you can't afford to purchase all these decorations, so you're having to make them, ask people for help. Your bridesmaids, your parents, your siblings, everyone will be willing to help. Your dad could be out back cutting the boards to make signage, while your mom could be inside helping hand paint something. I mean, everyone is always going to be willing to help. All it takes is you asking. That's literally all it takes. These wedding budget tips are definitely guaranteed to save you money, but it just kind of depends. You can pick and choose which ones you want to do. Do your research. Make sure you know what's going on. All right, everyone. Obviously, I know budgeting for your wedding can be a little bit of a tedious task, but it is necessary in order to make the wedding exactly what you want and to know how much money you have to spend on things. You can't really plan your wedding until you know what kind of money you're going to have available. So make sure you take these steps, talk to your family, do your research, know what things cost, so that way you can have a fantastic wedding. That is all I have for today. Thank you so much for watching. If you have any questions or comments, leave them below, and I'll see you next week for the next session of Wednesday wedding planning. Bye.
It's a beautiful night.